The Winds of Winter isn't out. We can only hope, one day, that it will be. But in the meantime, there are plenty of things to discuss. And for this video, the topic is Valyrian steel swords. We're going to go over every single one of them. We're going to go over where they might be, where they might go, and who might wield them in the coming books. Longclaw is the ancestral sword of House Mormont. It's a hand-and-a-half longsword, also called a bastard sword. Originally, it had a bear's head for a pommel, but this is changed to a wolf's head when Lord Jeor Mormont gives it to Jon Snow as a thanks for killing the White in A Game of Thrones. It has 3 fullers, grooves that reduce the weight but keep the strength of the sword.
I thought a wolf was more appropriate for you than a bear, so I had a new pommel made, called Longclaw.
Longclaw will likely be seeing a lot of use in the coming novels. It's incredibly strong and unlikely to break against the swords of the others, as happened to poor Sir Waymore Royce in the prologue of A Game of Thrones. The books have never confirmed Valyrian steel is one of the others' weaknesses. In the show, this does prove to be the case, and that's probably going to be the same in the books. During one Sam chapter, for example, he reads old records that state that dragon steel is an effective weapon. Dragon steel sure does sound like Valyrian steel. Also, when G.R. Martin was asked, I was wondering if Valyrian steel could stand against the swords of the others, and also if they could kill others. He gave the response, the Night's Watch would like to know that as well. So Longclaw will likely be used to slay any others or whites who come Jon Snow's way. But of course, first, Jon will have to be resurrected, deal with those who committed a coup against him, meet fake Arya, who is actually Jeyne Poole, find out who wrote the Pink Letter, deal with the Boltons, probably take back Winterfell, and resolve 1,000 other things before he gets to kill some ice zombies with his cool dragonsteel sword.
I don't want it.
Heartsbane is the ancestral sword of House Tarly. It's a 2-handed greatsword and has been passed down from Tarly to Tarly for 500 years. In the main story, the sword was meant to go to Randyll Tarly's son, Samwell. But as we all know, poor Sam is not a man fond of swords. He loves books and science and learning of all kinds instead. So Randyll forced Sam to take the black. Since Sam has been disinherited, the sword still remains with Randyll. And when he dies, it will, at least in theory, pass to his heir, Dickon Tarly.
Dickon.
Now in the show, Sam steals Heartsbane, but the books are going to take a different approach. Because unlike the show, Heartsbane isn't hanging on a wall. Randyll Tarly actively carries it on his person. We last see Heartsbane during A Feast for Crows, when Randyll is in Maidenpool. As of A Dance of Dragons, Randyll is in King's Landing, so Heartsbane is likely there as well. So this really puts a damper on Sam stealing it in the books. Right now, he's got no reason to head to King's Landing. And even if he did, how he would get Heartsbane is unclear. It's not like Sam is a master pickpocket. He's not going to just steal Heartsbane off Randyll. It could be that Sam takes Gilly to Horn Hill, like the show, and while there, Randyll arrives, but that seems a bit unlikely. So it is possible that Heartsbane will not be playing a part in Sam's story. Lady Forlorn is the ancestral sword of House Corbray. It's described as having a smoke gray blade, and its pommel containing a ruby shaped like a heart. The first scene in the series in which it appears is during A Feast for Crows, during the meeting between Littlefinger and the Lords Declarant, where Lyn Corbray waves it around and says, "My lady has a thirst. Whenever she comes out to dance, she likes a drop of red." After that, Lyn disappears until the Winds of Winter, where he reappears in the Sansa sample chapter. Lyn is an ambitious man, and in A Feast for Crows, Littlefinger admits that Lyn works for him. But in the Sansa sample chapter, that relationship is brought into question, as Sansa privately thinks to herself, perhaps instead of being Peter's man pretending to be Peter's foe, he was actually his foe pretending to be his man pretending to be his foe. So maybe he's on Littlefinger's side, maybe he's not. Considering his ambition, his skill with his sword, and his personality, which is often described as quick to anger, we are likely to see Lady Forlorn once more. Nightfall is a Valyrian sword currently in the hands of House Harlaw, but it is not Harlaw's ancestral sword. Little is known about its origin or its appearance. All we get is that it has a moonstone pommel and that Dalton Greyjoy took it from a dead pirate. Evidently, he used it quite extensively during his time as a Selsale. but there is no information on how the sword ended up in the hands of Harris Harlaw. Harris was a friend of Roderick Greyjoy, who died during the Greyjoy Rebellion. Perhaps Roderick gave it to him in his last moments, or Harris took it from Roderick's corpse. We have no direct evidence that Roderick ever wielded Nightfall, but he was the eldest son of Balon Greyjoy, so it is certainly possible he could have been using it. There isn't much evidence towards Nightfall being important in the Winds of Winter. It's only mentioned by name twice in the entire series. But Harris is the heir to House Harlaw, so that sword may see some use as the Ironborn plot progresses. Red Rain is a Valyrian sword currently owned by House Drum of the Iron Islands. Red Rain is not the ancestral blade of House Drum. Instead, it was stolen from an armored knight by Hilmar Drum, who took it with nothing but his wits and a wooden cudgel. Most fans believe that Red Rain was the ancestral sword of House Rain. This is because of the name Red Rain, and the fact that the Rain coat of arms was a red lion. Since Tywin Lannister had House Rain exterminated, there's nobody left to complain. So it's likely that House Drum will continue to own Red Rain unless some tragedy befalls them as well. Ice was the ancestral sword of House Stark. It was a great sword, described as wide as a man's hand and taller than Robb Stark. When Eddard Stark is arrested and then later sentenced to death by Joffrey in A Game of Thrones, Ice is confiscated by Ilyn Payne, who then uses it to lop off Ned Stark's head. In A Storm of Swords, Tywin Lannister has Ice reforged by Tob Homot into two separate Valyrian longswords. These are Widow's Wail and Oathkeeper.
What shall I call her? Widow's Wail! Widow's Wail, I like that.
Widow's Wail is described as having red and black ripples throughout the blade, but it doesn't see much use, and after Joffrey dies, the sword passes to his brother Tommen. Since Tommen is so young, Widow's Wail is kept locked up in the Red Keep. And since Tommen is unlikely to survive the series, somebody else will likely wield Widow's Wail instead. Some fans feel this will be Jaime. And of all characters, he does appear the most likely, not only in the sense that he would have access to it, as long as King's Landing remains in Lannister hands, but also because of a dream Jaime has while resting on a weirwood stump. In this dream, Jaime is beneath Casterly Rock in a dark cavern. He has a sword that burns a silver blue flame. When Brienne appears in this dream, Jaime gives her a sword that burns silver blue as well. After that, dead men appear. They're armored in snow and ribbons of mist that swirl around their shoulders. 5 of them are of the Kingsguard: Gerald Hightower, Arthur Dayne, Lewin Martell, Jon Darry, Oswald Went, and beside them is Rhaegar Targaryen. They tell him that he swore an oath to protect the king. Then Jaime's flaming sword goes dark, and the ghosts rush in. Only Brienne's sword still remains aflame. The dream ends there, but its importance echoes on. The dream is the reason he turns around and goes back to Harrenhal to save Brienne in A Storm of Swords. Some fans have wondered if this particular part of the dream is foreshadowing of them battling against the undead. Jaime with Widow's Wail and Brienne with Oathkeeper. Having a dream where you have a flaming sword and are up against dead men armored in snow does suggest the others. But Jaime's arc in the books is unclear. In the show, he does indeed go to Winterfell and participates in the battle against the White Walkers there. But show Jaime and book Jaime are on very different paths. Regardless, before Jaime could even get Widow's Wail, he would first have to survive Lady Stoneheart. And then he would have to go back to King's Landing to retrieve Widow's Wail. That's a long way to travel, and he may not have the time in the Winds of Winter, especially if Aegon gets there first. So maybe Widow's Wail has another use. A lot will happen in King's Landing over the next 2 books, so there'll be plenty of time for someone to need a Valyrian steel sword. Oathkeeper is the second sword forged from the remains of Ice. Tywin gives it to Jaime as a gift, and Jaime ends up giving it to Brienne, as Jaime feels during that chapter that it'd be appropriate for Brienne to protect Sansa with Eddard Stark's own Valyrian steel. Brienne sets off on a long journey with Oathkeeper in hand, one that eventually culminates in the meeting of Lady Stoneheart. Stoneheart thinks Brienne is a traitor working with the Lannisters, and she's only able to survive this encounter by promising to find Jaime and bringing him to Stoneheart, which in A Dance with the Dragons she does, with Oathkeeper on her person. Considering the last words Catelyn heard before being stabbed to death was Jaime Lannister sends his regards, and the general path of vengeance against anyone who participated in the Red Wedding, Stoneheart will likely want Jaime dead. But before that, some fans believe there will be a trial. This would make sense considering that Tyrion had his trial and Cersei will be having hers in the Winds of Winter. If the trial ends up being one of combat, well, Brienne with Oathkeeper in hand does seem like an appropriate champion for Jaime. Some fans have gone even further and theorized that Jaime will participate in a trial of the Seven. There's a great video by the Interesting Nerd Club about this topic, one that I suggest you check out. In short though, a trial of the Seven is a large trial by combat in which 14 people, 7 on the accuser side and 7 on the accused side, face off, with each of the 7 members representing one aspect of the god of the faith of the Seven. This theory does depend on Jaime having sympathetic members of the Brotherhood without banners wishing to give him a fair trial, or that Lady Stoneheart is still faithful to the Seven after the Red Wedding. Both of these aren't possible, but Lady Stoneheart also immediately tries to have Brienne killed in a feast for crows, so who really knows? But no matter how it goes, Brienne is unlikely to let Jaime die. If Stoneheart doesn't seem to be interested in talking things over or having a trial, Brienne will likely use Oathkeeper to defend Jaime. Brienne might even kill Lady Stoneheart, which could allow for a parallel between Jaime and Brienne, both of them having broken their oaths and killed those they were sworn to. It would also be particularly tragic if Brienne killed Lady Stoneheart with Eddard Stark's own Valyrian steel. After the Lady Stoneheart situation is resolved, perhaps Brienne will go north. She may continue her journey to find Sansa, regardless of whether Stoneheart is alive or dead. She may even go to Winterfell like she does in the show, which would make sense. Every piece of Valyrian steel will be needed in the War for the Dawn that is fast approaching. Blackfire is one of 2 ancestral swords of House Targaryen. It's a hand-and-a-half longsword, and was wielded by Aegon the Conqueror himself. From Aegon's conquest onward, it was handed down to each Targaryen king, as a symbol of their power and also their legitimacy. For how could a king be false if he carries the same sword as Aegon the Conqueror did? This all fell to pieces during the reign of Aegon IV. Aegon IV was a truly terrible king, one of the worst to sit the Iron Throne. He gave away countless treasures, allowed his court to grow corrupt, and fathered bastard after bastard. His feasting and lusting and greed eventually caught up with him, and at age 49 he died. His last command was to legitimize every single one of his many, many bastards, a decision which would result in several wars and tens of thousands dead. One of these bastards that was legitimized was Daemon. Aegon IV gave Blackfire to Daemon, who then took the last name of Blackfire. Daemon wielded Blackfire during the First Blackfire Rebellion, but was later killed by Bloodraven's personal guard, the Raven's Teeth. Aegor Rivers, Daemon's half-brother, also known as Bittersteel, then fled with Blackfire across the Narrow Sea. Since then, the location of Blackfire is a mystery. It's known that Bittersteel refused to give the sword to Daemon Blackfire II, but that's the last we hear of it. Even with the Blackfire rebellions that followed later, there's no mention of the sword. This has led many fans to believe that the Golden Company still has the sword, or that Illyrio Motapus has it, as Motapus does say he has a gift for Aegon, hidden away in one of the chests during a Tyrion chapter in A Dance with Dragons. Young Griff, or Aegon, with Blackfire in hand, would certainly help his claim to the throne, so it does seem pretty likely that Blackfire will appear in the Winds of Winter. Darksister is the second of the ancestral swords of House Targaryen. It was first wielded by Visenya, sister and wife of Aegon the Conqueror. Throughout the years, it passed through several Targaryen hands, before eventually ending up in the possession of one Brynden Rivers, better known as Bloodraven. In a 2018 Q&A, G.R.R. Martin confirmed that Bloodraven took Darksister with him when he went to the Wall. This means that the cave that Bran is in at the end of A Dance with Dragons probably also has Darksister. Since Bran is likely to head back south in the books, as he does in the show, Darksister may come back with him. Valyrian steel is rare, and every piece of it will be needed in the battles to come. Since Jojen is likely paced, the only 2 people who seem likely to carry it are either Hodor or Mira. Now, we know that the Hodor twist from the show will be present in the books, meaning Hodor will probably die. However, G.R. Martin has said the Hold the Door scene will be different. I thought they executed it very well, but there's going to be differences in the book. They did it very physical, hold the door with Hodor's strength. In the book, Hodor has stolen one of the old swords from the crypt. Bran has been warging into Hodor and practicing with his body, because Bran had been trained in swordplay. So telling Hodor to hold the door is more like hold this pass. defend it when enemies are coming, and Hodor is fighting and killing them. A little different, but the same idea. This might mean that Hodor will use Dark Sister to hold the door and allow Meera and Bran to escape. But if Hodor's fate is to be like the show, then he will die holding this door. And it seems a bit anticlimactic for Dark Sister to get a single scene in a cave and for that to be it, especially when Blackfyre is nearly sure to appear in Winds of Winter. It would be really fitting that if Westeros is about to experience Targaryens on their shores once more, that both of their ancestral swords are thrown into the mix. So maybe Meera will use it on her and Bran's journey back to the Wall. After that, she may keep it, although crannogmen tend to use spears. So maybe it'll go to Jon, but he already has Longclaw. Some fans think Arya will use it, and that is certainly possible. Dark Sister is a lighter blade, and J.R.R. Martin has said it was meant for a woman's hand. But plenty of men have used it as well, so there's a ton of possible options here. And considering how important Valyrian steel is, somebody will probably be wielding it in the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring. Bright Roar was the ancestral sword of House Lannister. It was purchased some time before the doom of Valyria, and it was said that the weight of gold that was paid for it could have raised an entire army. A century later, the sword was lost when Tommen II took it and a fleet to sail to Valyria, hell-bent on plundering its wealth and sorcery that Tommen was confident still remained there after the doom. But wouldn't you know it, Tommen nor his fleet ever returned, and Bright Roar disappeared somewhere amongst those smoky ruins. It's said that the fleet made it as far as Atlantis, and the Triarchs there sent a fleet of their own a year later to investigate the missing fleet, but they found no sign of them. In 291 AC, 6 years before the prologue of A Game of Thrones, Gerion Lannister heads to Valyria in an attempt to recover Bright Roar. He has yet to return. Just like his ancestor Tommen II, Gerion made it as far as Volantis, but after that, he vanished. Since Bright Roar is lost in Valyria, it's unlikely to appear in the story. But unlikely doesn't mean impossible. One way it could reappear is if Euron found it when he went to Valyria. Some fans argue about if he did or didn't, but J.R.R. Martin says he did. So maybe during that visit, Euron found Bright Roar. It's not without merit, considering that at the Kingsmoot, Euron gave away Valyrian daggers that he found, and he somehow located an entire suit of Valyrian steel armor. Though if he did find it, he's yet to mention it in any chapter he makes an appearance in. Tyrion is in Meereen, so in theory he could go to Valyria. It's not that far. He would just have to survive a battle in Meereen, a variety of deadly diseases, and the fraught political situation in Slaver's Bay. Oh, and of course, he would have to survive Valyria itself, the most dangerous place in the world to explore. And on top of all that, he would somehow have to find a single sword lost somewhere in Valyria. Lamentation was the ancestral sword of House Royce. The sword is last seen during the Dance of the Dragons, when William Royce and 6 other men attempt to rescue Joffrey Valyrian during a riot in King's Landing. Joffrey is at the dragon pit, and he foolishly attempts to ride the dragon Syrax, who then promptly bucks him off and Joffrey falls to his death. The 7 men who attempted to save him didn't fare any better. 3 of them, including William Royce, die. Royce is said to have been killed when a man leapt from a rooftop onto his back. Lamentation was then torn from his hand and carried off. Now officially, it's never been seen again. But there is a piece in Fire and Blood which suggests that Warwick Wheaton used Lamentation to kill Syrax. But that's never been confirmed, it's just a rumor. Lamentation completely disappears after this and has no other mentions. It's unknown if Warwick Wheaton even survived the storming of the Dragon Pit. And if he did, that he still had Lamentation after all the chaos. If Warwick died storming the Dragon Pit, perhaps the sword is still there, hidden in the rubble. But if Warwick lived, maybe he kept the sword. If that's the case, nearly anybody could have it by now. So it could reappear in the Winds of Winter or A Dream of Spring, or maybe it's a mystery that will never be solved. Orphanmaker, a name so edgy as to make Darkstar proud, is the Valyrian sword of House Roxton. House Roxton is a minor house, and none of its members have appeared in the main series. We only hear of the Roxtons from Fire and Blood and the World of Ice and Fire. What we know is that Orphanmaker was used by Jon Roxton to kill Hugh Hammer during the Second Battle of Tumbleton. After Roxton slayed Hugh Hammer, Hugh's men in turn slayed him. From there, the sword ended up in the hands of Lord Unwin Peake, although it's never explained how he came into possession of it. The last we hear of the sword is when Unwin Peake unsheaths it and says that unlike the previous hand, he was not blind, nor veiled, nor crippled. After that, the sword is never mentioned again, and its whereabouts are unknown. Unwin Peake resigned from his position as Hand of the King in 134 AC, and he probably took the sword with him. This means the Peakes may still be in possession of Orphanmaker, or they could have given it back to House Roxton, though that seems unlikely. And unlike Roxton, the Peakes are actually mentioned in the main books. We know that one Titus Peake is married to a Lannister named Margaret. Titus is the head of House Peake, so maybe the sword passed to him. There are also 3 Peake exiles in the Golden Company, and it's possible they could have it in their possession. Truth is a Valyrian sword that was carried by Moredo Rogare, a noble of Lys. There is genuinely no information on this one. It's referenced twice, once in Fire and Blood and once in the World of Ice and Fire. Moredo himself has exactly 6 references. Maybe G.R. Martin has something planned for Truth, but considering his output over the years, we are unlikely to ever know if this sword is important. Vigilance is the ancestral sword of House Hightower. The only time we hear of it is during the Dance of the Dragons. It's used by Ormond Hightower to knight Daeron Targaryen, whom he dubs Daeron the Daring, and after that we never hear of the sword again. Ormond is slain during the first Battle of Tumbleton, leaving the fate of Vigilance a mystery. He could have been using it during the battle. If that's the case, genuinely anybody at that battle could have picked it up. And considering there are at least 10 houses involved in this whole affair with thousands of men on each side, yeah, it could be anywhere. To be fair, it's never said specifically that the sword is lost, so maybe House Hightower still has it. The Hightowers have been noticeably absent from the main series, which is pretty odd considering that they're one of the most powerful houses in the entirety of Westeros. As Sam says in A Feast for Crows, "My father always said he was as wealthy as the Lannisters, and could command thrice as many swords as any of Highgarden's other bannermen." The Hightowers are up to something. In A Feast for Crows, there's talk of Lord Leighton Hightower and his daughter, the Mad Maid, and apparently they're consulting books of spells, maybe to raise an army from the deep. We also learn in the Forsaken chapter of The Winds of Winter that some of Leighton Hightower's sons are moving down the Whispering Sound in hopes of catching the Iron Fleet by surprise. Fans have wondered for years how that battle at Old Town will go, if Euron will die, or Old Town will be burned. But regardless of who wins or loses, it could be during this battle that Vigilance reappears. That's every Valyrian sword we know about. But before the video is over, let's cover 2 items that aren't swords but are Valyrian steel. The Dragonbinder is a 6-foot horn banded with red gold and dark Valyrian steel. It's covered in glyphs that glow like white fire when it's blown. We are first introduced to it during A Feast for Crows, when Euron appears at the Kingsmoot. Euron has one of his men blow the horn, and the sound that emerges from it is nightmarish. Aeron Damphair thinks it's a horn of hell. When Craggorn, the hornblower, finishes, he falls to the ground dead, with blisters on his lips and a bleeding chest. We later learn that his lungs were charred black from blowing it. In A Dance with Dragons, Mokuro, the Red Priest that first appears in one of Tyrion's chapters, tells Victarion Greyjoy that the horn is Dragonbinder, and while it will kill whoever blows it, any dragon that hears the horn will obey the horn's master. How does one become the master of the Dragonbinder? As Mokuro says, you must claim the horn with blood. This horn has been a source of debate among fans ever since it first appeared. It obviously has some magical power. Craggorn didn't die for no reason, but does it really have the power to bind dragons? And if it does, what will Victarion do with the dragon? Every theory, both reasonable and unreasonable, has been put forth on this matter. Some fans think the horn is a red herring. Others think that when the horn is blown near a dragon, its results will be unexpected and deadly. No matter what, whenever this horn gets blown, it'll probably be disastrous. Aegon the Conqueror's crown may not be a sword, but it is made of Valyrian steel, and it is also very likely to be important in the Winds of Winter. Aegon's crown was lost when Daeron I, the 8th Targaryen to sit the throne, invaded Dorne. At first it seemed as if victory was at hand. Dornish nobles eventually surrendered in an event known as the Submission of Sunspear in 158 AC, but some Dornish continued to fight, and the Targaryen occupation force was said to have suffered some 40 to 50,000 deaths over just 3 years. Eventually, in 161 AC, Daeron met with some Dornishmen under a banner of peace, only to be betrayed, and the king, with Blackfire in hand, died alongside 3 of his Kingsguard. Now, Blackfire was returned. We aren't told exactly when, but eventually it found its way back into Targaryen hands. The crown, however, did not. Aegon the Conqueror's crown disappeared in Dorne and is yet to resurface, so by the time of the books, it's been missing for about 140 years. Some fans believe that the crown is still, after all this time, in the hands of the Martells. If that's true, it could be a very useful tool in the coming Dance of the Dragons between young Griff and Daenerys. It's assumed, and was mentioned earlier, that Blackfyre is likely now in young Griff's hands, given to him by the Golden Company or Illyrio. On its own, the sword would be a useful tool to prove legitimacy, but it could be even further boosted if Doran Martell has the crown and gives it to young Griff. He would have the sword, the crown, and the looks. Few would be able to confidently doubt that he's Targaryen. This would be especially interesting when compared to Daenerys. Nobody would doubt she is a Targaryen either. She has the looks and the dragons. So when she arrives in Westeros, which side will people choose? Which Targaryen will they fight for? We can only hope to learn these answers in the Winds of Winter. That's all I have for today. Check out my video on the history of the Winds of Winter, or my video on theories about Kvothe from the Kingkiller Chronicles.